In this video, we are going to look at the processes that take place at the coast. First of those processes is erosion. Now, within that, there are four types of erosion. The first is hydraulic action. This is when air is forced into the cracks in a cliff face or into the rock by the pounding of the waves. When these waves pound against the cliff face, the air inside that is compressed and the pressure is increased. As that happens, the pressure opens up the crack slightly, making it wider, and this repeated motion, this happening over and over again over a long time, will eventually break down the rock and break it apart. The next type of erosion is abrasion. This is when we have rocks and stones that are carried by waves, hit against the sea floor or at the base of a cliff, and these kind of wear them down, and like a sandpaper effect. And a good little tip there to remember is abrasion has an S in it. The S there stands for the sandpaper effect. Now, the next one is attrition. Attrition is when particles and rocks are knocking against each other and they break apart and they are getting rounder and smoother. The way you remember this is the TT in attrition. They are thrown. TT, they're thrown. They're thrown together and they get smaller and they get rounder. The last type of erosion there is solution. Now, salt water is slightly acidic, and certain rocks will dissolve in seawater. Some rocks, such as chalk and limestone, very, very prone to solution, and the rock actually becomes dissolved in the water, and we get erosion taking place in that way. Now, we also have weathering. Weathering takes place in situ, above the water line. The first type of weathering here that we've got is chemical weathering. Similar to what we just looked at in solution, rainwater can also be acidic because it contains carbon dioxide from the air. When the rain makes contact with certain rocks, again, limestone, chalk are an example, the rocks dissolve. They take a chemical reaction and become part of the water, the rainwater. The next one there is biological weathering. So plants, when their roots start to grow, they can get into small cracks. As the roots grow wider and wider, they can break rocks apart. Similar with animals burrowing, they can actually damage the structure of certain rocks, especially mudstone and sandstone, quite weak rocks anyway. The burrowing of certain animals can alter the strata of the rock. The last one there is mechanical weathering, so I was referred to as freeze-thaw weathering. This is when water collects in little cracks in the rock. When the temperature decreases overnight, the rainwater will freeze. When water freezes, it expands. This breaks the rock apart slightly, makes the cracks even bigger. When that happens over and over again, the melting during the day and the freezing during the night, the cracks gradually get wider and wider and wider until eventually the rock will break apart and fall down into a little pile, the bottom of the hill or wherever it is on the cliff. We call those little piles of material as scree. Now, the last process here that we're going to look at is deposition. When water loses energy, it will deposit any material that it is carrying. Now, there are four methods of transportation. So we've got traction, where the material is rolled along the seafloor. Saltation, where slightly smaller rocks are bouncing along the seafloor. The water has enough energy to pick them up, but it can't carry them, so it drops them again. Suspension is when even smaller rocks, lighter material, can be carried because of the energy in the waves. And then solution, obviously, is when water is dissolved. When rocks are dissolved in the water, it can be transported within it. Okay. When we lose energy, we run out of energy. That sediment has to be dropped, and that's called deposition. When you run out of energy, you drop what you're carrying, you deposit them, and that is the process that takes place at the coast. Things like clay, pebbles, even larger rocks. When you go to the beach, you'll see quite a large, significant sized rocks that have been pushed onto a beach or in the coast. They are your processes at the coast.